those numbers then, if you multiply those all out, it comes out into the next to the last column. The state says an adequate education in East Kingston should cost $1,513,739, and that's how much aid is provided to East Kingston. And that is a combination of the statewide property tax and the cash that's sent. So statewide property tax picks up part of that. So how much is that? In East Kingston, it's $4,134 per pupil. And as you'll see, the differences among the other towns are not very great. Slightly different numbers as a result, but they're all between $4,000 and $4,400. Look up at the top. The actual average cost per pupil in New Hampshire in 2018-19 was $16,346. So the state is saying an adequate education should cost about a quarter of what school districts are actually spending on their students. So this was some work I did with the superintendent in Pittsfield. And we did it also in Hopkinton, but we're only going to show you the Pittsfield one. There are 581 students in Pittsfield that year. And the state said that the adequate education in Pittsfield should cost $2,690,333, or $46.30 per student. The district at that point was spending over $10 million, around $17,700 per student. So what I did with the superintendent and their business manager is to go to their budget, and if you've ever been on the school board and seen the budgets, you know it's about a 700 line item. And what we did is we went through and said, we're going to preserve the core classes throughout the school system. And we're going to reduce the budget wherever that's not a core class. We'll take it out. We'll see. We're going to try to bring it down to what would an adequate education look like in that town. So we eliminated 5 of the 16 teachers at the elementary school, all art, music, and physical education, all school nurses, all transportation. Parents have to bring their kids to school and pick them up. No buses. We eliminated half the secretaries, 4 science teachers, all building and grounds maintenance, all foreign language courses, counseling, 4 of the 8 custodians, so cleaning in the schools was only once a week, all field trips, all the benefits of the teachers, the health insurance, the retirement, all of that. Come down, all athletic programs, 34 and a half teachers' aides, all equipment, the ESOL class. I'm not going to read them all. Go to the next page, John. All the substitute teachers, no substitute teachers, so if the teacher has to be absent, sorry, kids don't come to school or have your parents pick you up. All co-curricular programs, summer recreation stipend, go through the whole list. So we eliminated all this. We also recorded for each of these changes where that violated a federal or state law. Transportation is required through 8th grade by law. And where it violated teacher contracts or state minimum standards. So when we got through all that, we got the budget down to $5.2 million. But our target was 2.6. So we had to continue, and at that point there was nothing left in the budget other than the remaining teachers. So we had to take out about half of the remaining teachers. At that point, we had a class size of 60 students per teacher. And all other activities of the school system were eliminated. That's what the state says would provide an adequate education in Pittsfield. And we did it in Hopkinton and came up with much the same thing. The way the state came up with the $4,000 per pupil is totally ridiculous. And nobody has ever sat down to say, well, wait a minute, what would that pay? Another way you can look at this, the $4,000 and the dollar amounts, the $2.69 million for Pittsfield, it would pay through 3rd grade. So that the state's responsibility as it's defining it, is we'll take care of grades 1, 2, and 3. You folks are responsible for all the rest on your local tax base. So this is one way we have of looking at what's the reality that is occurring in the schools under the system. This is a question of somebody in the top part of the table, somebody who is graduating from UNH with a bachelor's degree in education, going to take their first teaching job someplace in New Hampshire, and they're sending their resume out. And what kind of salaries are the school districts offering? Portsmouth, $44,000, Stratham, $45,000, Exeter, $45,000, in Allenstown, $34,000, in Franklin, $32,000. There's a $10,000 difference. So when you're graduating with a BA degree, where are you going to go if you have a choice? These are $10,000 a year differences. Now, if you have a master's degree first year, so you stayed on for the extra classes to get your master's, these are the starting salaries for masters. There's a $15,000 difference. So where's the new teacher going to choose if they have a choice? Further, what does this mean 2 years later? It means that the teacher who took the job in Stratford at $32,000, as soon as there's an opening somewhere nearby, maybe Hanover, they're going to move. They're going to take that job. And so what happens is, in the poor districts, about a third of the teachers turn over every year. So what does that mean to trying to maintain a consistent curriculum, communicating from a second grade teacher who's left to the third grade teacher about the kids that she is going to have? These salary differences have huge impacts on what a particular district can provide. Why are they different? Because the tax rates over here in the low-wage towns are much higher, and they can't convince their local voters to increase the salaries enough, because it's going to mean increased taxes. So this is just one example of the problem. And this shows another slide about how it's changed in the last 10 years. We've said it's getting worse. So this plots for those districts teacher salaries in 2007-8, and these are the average salaries in 2017-18. So if you look at that, the wealthy districts, the property wealthy districts, teacher salaries are exploding. The poor districts, they've increased, they certainly have, but nowhere near the level of the ones in the property wealthy districts. So this problem of differentials in teacher salaries has been increasing.
So now, just reiterate about the statewide education properties act. The legislature, this is the piece of your local property tax that you may never have even noticed.
There's another mic right there.
The state is, when state officials talk about how much the state is providing for education, they like to talk about the statewide property tax. But the state doesn't collect it. It's collected by the towns and cities. The money is kept locally, it's spent locally. It's just really an accounting trick. And the state has deliberately kept the level at the same, that $363 million for 10 years. So that basically means that the state's contribution, as expenses have gone up, the state's collecting that at the same number amount. And so the rates have continued to go down. So the portion of the expense that this is being paid nominally by the state through the statewide property tax keeps going down. And the reason for that is a political reason. The state is afraid to impose higher statewide property taxes on wealthy districts. They don't want to pay. And that gets to the issue of whose kids are they? Are they Claremont's kids, or are they all of our kids? So SWEP is really, and even the people at the BIA recognize it, it's just an illusion, it's just a pass-through. It's part of the local property tax. It gives the state the ability to say they're actually spending more than they are. This, and Doug mentioned free and reduced lunches, and this, one of the things, we talked to a lot of teachers and students and parents and taxpayers in the last 2 years, and one of the things we've heard a lot about is the burdens on schools now, in part because of the opioid crisis and also just all the mental health issues and everything else. There are lots of needy kids. And when you talk to teachers, they will tell you that kids from a poverty background or English language learners or kids from a family that's been ripped apart by the opioid crisis have more needs. It costs more, it takes more effort to educate them. And this is just another way of looking at, well, how are those kids distributed? And eligibility for free and reduced lunch is a marker, it's a metric, it's a measure of poverty. And you can see at the top, and look at Manchester, 57% of the kids in Manchester are poor. So that means that school district, which again, we've already seen has lower property values, also has an increased burden. So what we're asking of these school districts in terms of dealing with troubled kids, with kids that are very needy, is again, not spread out evenly. And unfortunately, a lot of the places that have the most needy kids have the lowest tax bases. So look at Franklin. Franklin, more than half the kids are poor in Franklin. Claremont, just exactly half. And so, again, taxpayers in those towns and teachers in those towns getting paid less, having to pay more, having higher responsibilities. There are a lot of quiet heroes in our schools across the state. There are a lot of quiet heroes. But the burdens that they have to contend with are very uneven. And then in the bottom, you can see some of the towns that have far fewer poor kids. Newfields is one of them. There's a lot that's expected of educating a normal kid from a middle-class background, but even more is asked of a lot of the school districts that have more kids in poverty and fewer resources. So this is a little bit about our project that Doug and I have been working on. We call it the Inter-School Funding Fairness Project. And we've done more than 75 forums, and we are trying to build a network of people to get everyone to flex their democratic muscles. New Hampshire is a very accessible state politically. We have 400 reps. There are lots of ways that we can move public policy in the state, but we got to get organized. And somebody asked the question, why didn't the legislature obey the Claremont decisions? Because the legislature didn't hear from people like us about it. That's why. And so they need to hear from people like us that this is unacceptable. So we are trying to do that. We had you all sign in the sign-in sheet. We have an email newsletter that we send around that's maintained by another person with white hair. Not all of us are old and white haired, but a lot of us are. And that newsletter alerts people to the next legislative hearing or the next forum. And it really worked. We got people to come to legislative hearings and testify. And not us, but real taxpayers and school people and students and parents. And the legislature hadn't heard anything from anybody about this really in 10 years, and they started to hear. And it started to be, we started doing these forums in 2018 before the legislative election. And we encourage people, after we leave in 2 weeks, invite your local legislative candidates and have them come in and ask them about property taxes and ask them about school funding. And so a lot of the people that were elected in 2018 had heard about property taxes from their constituents for the first time in a while. So it can work, and we're trying to keep that going. And we are, Doug does incredible research and analysis that's the basis of a lot of these slides. We've been in the legislature a lot. We have been in the media a lot, public radio and newspapers. Some of our folks are younger and better than we are necessarily at the social media of the 21st century, but we're doing that too. And legal advocacy. I'm working on this brief in the Condell case. And this is sort of a recap. When we started this in 2018, the legislature had done something that was even more crazy. They had cut, beginning in 2015, a piece of the aid that was intended for the poor districts. They're looking for things to cut. So they decided to cut the aid for the poorest districts. It was called stabilization aid. And thanks in considerable part to our advocacy and the people that we got to come to the legislature stopped those cuts and restored that. So that was our first goal. We also thought that in 2019, that maybe they would come halfway from, $3,600 a year to, we didn't think they'd get to 15 or 16, but maybe they'd get to 7,000 or 8,000. They didn't do that, but they did agree in the next school year to put some more money in the budget for a lot of the poor school districts. So that was something. Unfortunately, at the governor's insistence, that's only one-time money, and Doug will say everything the legislature do is one-time money because subsequent legislatures can change it. But they've taken a modest step, and now they need to hear from all of us that a modest one-time step isn't enough. Because the modest step they took will help, but it doesn't change the dynamics you've seen. It's not enough money to change the dynamics. So one other thing they've done, and this was Doug's idea, to create a truly independent commission to look at this, to look at what really constitutes an adequate education, how much does it cost, and how we should pay for it. Doug had that idea, the legislature did put that in, that commission has started to work, and we had a lot of trouble with the prior 2 or 3 legislative commissions that were just legislators who just didn't have the courage to really look at this. This new commission has a lot of public people, including the superintendent from this regional co-op. He's on that commission. Including Senator Morgan, who represents some of these towns. He's on that commission. But there's also business people, current and former educators, a range of people who are pledged to take a new look at this. So one of our roles is to keep their feet to the fire, to go to their meetings and ask questions and make comments. Doug did that yesterday at the commission. Don't forget, you have to figure these things out. You can't just get lost. So those are the things we're working on. The next step is that amicus brief, friend of the court brief, keep bird dogging that commission, thinking about another lawsuit perhaps, keeping the pressure on the legislature and the governor, and recognizing it may take 5 years to make this happen. This is where you all come in, because you all are citizens. This affects you. Property taxes affect everybody. This is not a sort of an arcane, obscure issue. Everybody, almost everybody in New Hampshire pays property taxes. We have high rates of home ownership, and every business pays them. So it affects everybody, and the rates are very uneven. So our legislators need to hear that it's not fair. So this is a what you can do slide. You can write a letter to the editor, just saying in your own words, in 3 sentences, what you heard tonight and why it's unfair. You can post comments on Facebook and other social media. You can talk to your family and friends about this. And just say, did you know? Here's how it works. And you can talk to your legislators. And Doug was a legislator, and one of the things, I have a lot of friends in the legislature. They will tell you that they hear from 10 people, it's a landslide. If they hear from a lot of people, most of them pay attention. There are a few who are so focused and ideological they don't care what their constituents think, but most of them really care what their constituents think. And most of them have heard some stuff about property taxes. They need to hear a lot more. And they are very accessible, and they will respond. So you need to contact them and write them and ask them questions. One of the handouts you got tonight is the little school funding in brief. It has some questions that you can ask, very simple questions, basic questions about, do you support doing something to make this property tax system more fair? Will you make sure the commission does its job? Will you make sure that the state finds a fair way to fund this? So it's really on all of us as citizens, and we can make it happen. We've seen just our little effort in the last year and a half has really made change. It generated more than $100 million in more state aid, and it has generated a lot of interest. But we all need to keep the pressure on, and we can do it. In New Hampshire, it's uniquely easy to do it. And it's it's all on us. It's all on us. So,
Oh, yes, this is the, yeah.
So the final thought is pretty simple. That a New Hampshire student's educational opportunities and a property owner's school tax rate shouldn't vary based on their zip code. That's what this is all about. To give equal opportunity to the students across the state and to give equal tax rates to the property taxpayers across the state. I would make one other comment at this point, which is you're just before local school district meetings here. I am in Chichester, my town. And I've been on the school board, I've been on the budget committee, all of that over the years. And when you're in those roles, what you're doing is you're in a silo and you're looking at your town, your school district's budget. You're not looking, what's the town 20 miles away look like in comparison to us? What you're doing is you're looking at what was the budget last year? How much of an increase can we possibly allow? Or how much of a decrease do we want to see? And the only thing you're looking at is the history in your own town. And the point of this presentation is the problem is not in the town. The problem is in the state. And the only way to deal with the crises that occur each year in the budgeting process is to put some of the pressure back on the state to help resolve those problems.
let me just say one other thing about how I got into this. I got into this as a young lawyer in Berlin, where I was a legal aid lawyer, and I had kids, and I went to a Berlin's budget meeting, all fired up to say, you gotta do what you gotta do to have good schools for my kids. And in those days, Berlin did have good schools. And there I saw a range of elderly people, some of them my neighbors, and they were saying, we care about kids, we care about schools, but we can't afford these taxes. And now, I'm a senior citizen on a fixed income. I've seen this from both sides. And the state has put us all in a cruel box where it's seniors versus parents fighting over what they can possibly do within their municipal lines, while the state has retreated more and more from its obligation. So it's tragic, it's sad to see towns divide on those lines when it's really not the fault of seniors who can't afford the taxes, and it's not the fault of parents who want good schools. It's the fault of our state government for stepping away, from running away from its responsibility to pay for this in a fair way. End of sermon. Now time for questions.
So, do you have a proposal as to how to pay for it in a way that is equitable? Because if you're going to do it the current way, so let's say they change the adequacy to 16,000, it's still going to funnel currently through property taxes. I know at one point they tried to even it out by having some of they used to call them donor towns pay more, but I believe it was proven to be inequitable because they were paying for kids. Is there a better way without doing a sales tax or an income tax, which New Hampshire is against? Is there a way to raise the money?
There are a lot of different ways, and one of the things that we decided to do is to not march in here with our prescription, but instead to say, here's the problem. You all need to get concerned enough to say that this needs to be fixed. And then there are a range of possible fixes. There are a range of different possible taxes. There are possible combinations of taxes. One of the things that Doug has done, and we're not advocating this, is he looked at what it would be like if we had a true statewide property tax that paid for all of this. And I'll let him explain it, but the bottom line is most people's taxes would go down.
Remember the 3.29 billion, okay, and about 3/4 of that is coming from property taxes. If you're going to replace property taxes with something else, you got to come up with a lot of money. Okay, you can't do that on a cable TV tax, for example. I mean, but as John said, I did look, I said, okay, what would an equal statewide tax rate for schools have to be? And it would have to be about $12.50 And that means that any town where the tax rate currently is below that would have to pay more, and every town that's above that would pay less. And every taxpayer in the state would be paying the same amount. I want to repeat, we're not advocating it, but it gives you an idea. And there are other taxes that could be imposed, and the property tax could be changed. You know, the current use law is sitting there. Use is a thing, so that commercial industrial property could be taxed at one rate, homes could be taxed at another. You could have a residential deduction of $25,000 or $50,000 of the first house. There are a lot of things that could be done in the system. But until we get everybody to understand the problem, I'm sure there will be a lot of people who are smart enough to come up with their own proposals, and then those can be debated in the process. But until everybody agrees that there's a problem here that needs to be addressed, it doesn't matter what solution you come up with. Questions? We really want questions in the back.
Keep thinking back to the slide that you showed of New Hampshire being the state with the lowest amount of money spent per pupil. On the far end of that was Vermont, right next door. What are some of the things that they're doing that we're not? We're not that different.
I hate to say this, but I don't know. And it's one of the reasons we set up the commission. We wanted to have people nationally who understand how other states fund their schools to come into the state and say, here's some options, here's some ways to deal with it. In the past, when the legislature has set up a little committee, they've only looked at within New Hampshire's borders, and so I'm as guilty of that. I don't know right now how Vermont's doing that, nor do I know how Tennessee is doing 50%. So that is one set of information we need to get in here through the commission to maybe come up with some possible solutions.
Thank you.
Well, one of the things is Vermont now it's got a program to pay people to move to the state. Vermont has very high taxes, okay? They make us look good when it comes to taxes. They may have lower property taxes, I'm not sure, but their overall tax on the individual is high, so we are very different states. One of the questions I wanted to ask, yeah, this bar chart up here you got is great, but where do we finish in terms of the quality of education? I understand property taxes are high, but we finish fairly high.
Yes, we do.
When it comes to the quality of the education we give our kids. And the other thing is, if we take, and this is, you know, I don't want to take all the time during questions, but you know, at least the property tax base is as terrible as it might be, you still have control. Whereas if you send it up to Concord, God forbid you send it down to Washington, you lose more and more control. I think that you're going to lose that control you have, and by adding a broad-based tax, whatever it might be, and I've got a few ideas what the taxes might be or what people are thinking about. I think the overall taxes that people pay, if you go out 10 years from now, will be higher. Because as the property taxes come down, there are a lot of other things people want to spend money on, and before you know it, your property taxes will be moving up to fund these other things, because you won't feel it directly. You feel it when you look at your property taxes now, but if it's a little bit here and a little bit there, you'll end up paying, I think, a lot more. But
I don't disagree with a lot of what you've said. New Hampshire schools, when you look at the performance of the students through the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the New Hampshire kids do fairly well in comparison to other states. Massachusetts does a little better, there are a few other states, but we're certainly in the top 10 or 12 in terms of those limited outcome measures, if you will, achievement measures. But there's one part of that I did a bit of research on this. I don't even think John knows about this, but it turns out that if you took the white kids in New Hampshire, in the public schools, they perform below average of white kids throughout the U.S. It's only our minority kids who perform so much better on those tests than their counterparts in other states that our state average is high. That is something that people don't totally, fully grasp. We have a different demographic population than other states, and it affects, in terms of poverty and other things, our suburban communities do very well. Our urban communities don't. So you take the averages, some of our urban communities in those measures perform lower than some of the southern states' averages.
One of the things that people love about New Hampshire, they think they love, is local control. But I guess I think there's real local control and there's illusory local control. The people in Pittsfield and Berlin don't have local control. They are taxing themselves at a very high rate, but they can raise so little money that they are cutting basic pieces out of their education. So their control is, what do we cut? They don't have the ability to make decisions in a way that we would like them to be able to make, where they can make reasonable decisions about what their kids need and have reasonable taxes for their property owners. They don't have local control. People in Portsmouth have a lot of local control. So we have this, local control is a wonderful thing, but this funding system strips local control away, because you can't ask the people in Pittsfield to pay more. So you have to keep cutting the schools, and that's a terrible choice, and that's what happens. So if the resources were allocated more fairly, there are lots of ways where local decisions could be made about curriculum, about who gets hired, all kinds of things. Those decisions could be made locally, but there would be somewhat of a level playing field for those decisions to be made. Yes?
In Berlin, I just wanted the people to know that the town is so taxed, as you have indicated, that they cannot afford to hire a language teacher. So if they have students that are smart enough to go to an Ivy League college, they won't get in because they can't afford to hire a teacher that can teach languages. That's one.
That's right, and that puts the barrier in front of those kids succeeding in that marketplace of ideas that the court talks about. Okay.
Actually, that's not true, because Virtual Learning Academy will provide those kids with the 4 languages that they need to go on. So that's not exactly true.
The Virtual Language Academy can provide a lot of things, but there are a whole range of things. That in Pittsfield, there are no AP classes.
We have AP classes.
I know, but kids in Hanover and Concord have AP classes in their schools where they can sit with their students and their fellow students and their teachers. The virtual learning thing is wonderful, but it shouldn't be the only choice.
No, but it is another alternative to help these kids.
Yes, it is.
It starts in middle school, it doesn't just wait for high school.
Yeah.
So there are ways for them to get, and the state of New Hampshire is supporting that. So in their own way, they are helping these kids who don't have that option.
To a limited extent, I agree.
Not a limited extent, it's an extensive extent, if you think about it.
Well, it's not the same as what is available to the kids in Hanover or Portsmouth. It's not a total shut-off, but it's not the same.
Other towns that are well off state, those courses as well.
I'm sorry, couldn't you know
They
that?
also have that option.
Yeah.
Other courses also do.
Yeah.
It's not just the kids
Yeah.
that are limited, it's also academic.
One of the things that the people in Berlin have done is they've really tried to partner with the technical college up there they've been very creative, and I think they definitely have kids that do the virtual academy. They've tried to do all these different kind of ways to stretch what they have, and that's good. So we definitely want to have that happen. Other questions? Let me just other people who haven't asked a question first, and then we'll
I
come
just
back.
have kind of a follow-up comment. I'm a local teacher in a neighboring district, and I won't mention the name of the district, but we are currently being decimated by this exact situation. I've been there since 2005, and my teaching contract has only passed, I believe, 3 times. So as a result, people who are hired after me will essentially make more than I do, people with less experience. I'm still stuck at the same rate that I was back when I first started the last time my contract passed. We've cut language, we've cut our technology budget. I teach technology. My budget last year was $300. That wasn't enough to buy the ink for my printer. We've cut language, we've cut technology, we've cut positions. We have about 37 people every year that leave. They usually go to Bedford. so they usually go to Bedford and they get a wonderful job and they're there until they retire. I have too much experience now, so I can't make that hop to Bedford because I've been teaching for 22 years, so I'm stuck. We're now closing our middle school. So next year, our middle school will close. Our 6th graders are going back to elementary, and our 7th and 8th graders are going to high school. It's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. Our enrollment is down. The tax rate continues to climb. People are leaving the town. People are moving to SAU 16. And it will not be long. And actually, right now, myself and my 37 coworkers, we don't know who's going to have a job at the end of the year. We'll find out next Friday if we have a job. So it has to get fixed.
And again, this is really affecting the economies of the towns. If people are leaving, businesses are closing, those are consequences that we all, even those of us who are maybe not as invested in education, care about, because they're broader economic consequences. Other questions?
I have a question about the costs. Maybe you showed this up there, the cost per pupil. Have you compared what that is in New Hampshire versus other states?
Yes.
Or expenditure per pupil? Are we higher than other states?
We're in the top 10 or 12 in terms of how much we spend per pupil. So people here value education. They are willing to spend a lot of money on it. We have good results, as was pointed out. The problem is how we pay for it is so inequitable that some people have to sacrifice a lot more, and even when they do that, the quality, the choices available to their kids are different. So, in the average, we care about education. We always have. We spend a lot of money, but we don't do it in an equitable way.
You said that this has kind of blown up in the last, 5-7 years or whatnot?
10 years or so.
10 years. Have you looked at the passing of the Common Core standards and how that's drastically changed the way the kids are educated with switching? It didn't?
No, not really. It's the word Common Core. Everybody has this big sort of mystical feeling about it's a new way of teaching. It's not. It's just a new way of looking at what we need kids to know. So teaching in schools has not changed.
Do you get to do you have more control with how you what you get to teach your children?
That we've never had that control. So we always, whether it's the Common Core test or the test that we got rid of 5 years ago, we've lost that a long time ago. So the Common Core hasn't changed that necessarily. It's made it slightly different. So we've always had to teach the test depending on where we are. I mean, we have the NEWA that we give every year, Smart Balance. Some people are moving away from that. So that has changed. The Common Core is just the name given to those standards.
Didn't they need to didn't you have to provide different, every kid had to have a tablet. You had to have all these different tools and stuff like that. We had to no?
No, not necessarily. No. I mean, some districts have that initiative, but no. No. Maine did. Maine gave every kid a laptop, but New Hampshire.
We are not experts on educational content or curricula. Our thing is how do we, whatever charter schools, we don't take a position on charter schools, and they're public schools in New Hampshire. The question is, however we're going to do this, however we're going to do this, we need to pay for it in a fair way that doesn't really hammer people in some towns and not others. So those are important debates to have. We're really talking about basic, how do we pay for it in a fair way.
I'll just comment on some of the issues around virtual learning, charter schools. The Supreme Court said that the state's responsible for the education of every child. That doesn't say only in the public schools. It doesn't say that charter schools are excluded. It's all kids. It's the state's responsibility. And that's sort of the position I feel comfortable with, that it doesn't matter what kind of school, what kind of curriculum in that local public school there may be, the state is still responsible for that education. And we get into these other debates about is this technique better than this? I remember we went to block scheduling. How long ago was that? 25 years ago? And before that, there wasn't block scheduling. And before that, there were the open classrooms where there were the kids in 3rd and 4th and 5th grade were all kind of mixing around in the same big room. We've gone through lots of cycles of different educational techniques, but none of those have addressed the issue of the inequity in the taxes.
You commented once, I just want to make sure that we give anybody who hasn't first chance. And you had raised your hand before, so.
Yeah, just a couple things. I don't want to hog all your time, but one of the taxes you didn't show up there was the dividend interest tax, okay? And, you know, the dividend and interest tax, you know, a lot of people have this common misconception, there's no income tax in the state. Well, there is an income tax. It's called the dividend and interest tax. I've been here for 36 years, and for 36 years I've paid the tax, okay? And it's quite a bit for me now, because I'm fortunate enough that, yeah, I'm a little bit better off than, you know, probably the average person. But I paid that tax. I don't have any kids in the school system, and I paid high property taxes for 36 years. I said at the school meeting we had, I think education is the most important thing we spend our money on, but like so many other things that government does at whatever level, we can't just make it a blank check. One of the things on this school, we have a lot of small schools located within close proximity to one another. Now that's not the case up in the North Country. You know, Berlin is an issue unto itself. But down here, wouldn't it be possible to combine some of these services that say East Kingston uses with Kensington or Southampton, you know, where maybe some of the professionals that work in one school could spend some time in the other school, where we could reduce the number of people we have over time, but maybe increase the salaries we're giving to some of those people. Do we need a certain special education person 5 days a week in one school, when maybe they could spend a day or two and say, you know, just as an idea, not only addressing this from the revenue side, but maybe making some efforts to cut the growth from 3 or 4% a year down to, you know, maybe 2.5%. I don't know.
I'll respond to a couple of pieces. One, the interest and dividends tax. If you go to the RSAs, the law, the title of it is income tax. It's not interest and dividends tax.
Right.
It's income tax. Subsequently, they define what things will be counted as income, and only interest and dividends are there. This latest legislative session, there was a proposal to add capital gains to it. But the title of the law is income tax.
Right.
None of that money goes to the schools. That money is only for the general fund of the state and is not part of the education trust fund that provides aid to the schools.
But it all helps to balance the budget for the state, and if it wasn't there, then there would be more pressure on the state to raise, you know, money for whatever, whether, you know,
Yes.
it would, plus on the, you know, and then I'll shut up. The one final thing here is, if you target a certain group and say capital gains, who's going to be exempt from paying that? Okay, will certain businesses be exempt? Will homeowners be exempt?
I don't know. I'm not proposing it. You'd have to read the bill.
No, but what I'm saying is, it's targeting a relatively small group, I don't know, 5% or whatever it is. And when it was proposed, they came up with an amount. They said $134 million is what it was. Now, how they came up with that number, God only knows. But that wouldn't, of course, solve the problem. And what it might do is do what you've seen in places like Connecticut, New Jersey, where people, this tax creeps in, and then the people that are affected by the tax, yes, upper middle income people, not hedge fund guys from friggin' Connecticut, but they will migrate out of the state, and it will be a
Well, the taxes that go to the schools right now are not shared equally. You're talking about not being shared equally, some people paying, some people not. The property tax, some people are paying 7 times what other people are paying. Same issue. The question is, if you're paying the interest and dividends tax and you live in East Kingston, you're paying the same tax rate as somebody who lives in Claremont and is paying that tax. Nobody complains about that.
But the proposal was, and it was directed specifically at education, funding education, was a 5% capital gains tax. Now that was what they were proposing, okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I notice people have been leaving. We'll stay, so if some of you have other questions you want to talk about, I don't want to make others of you feel like you got to stay. If you want to stay, fine. We'll stay as long as you would like. Questions? Yes.
I have one more question. You had a goals slide, and the first goal was achieved, third goal was achieved. second goal of,
Is $7,500 per pupil.
per pupil. So that's not achieved. Do you have other goals?
We have not,
Is this what our?
we have not established goals for the current legislative session. Our goal this year is to continue educating the public, continue getting people involved, and our focus is going to be on business and community leadership. So we want to go visit the chambers of commerce all around the state, the Rotary clubs. We want to move in that direction, but we don't have a legislative goal this year. Next year, we probably will.
And, you know, the other thing is now the commission, their job is to figure this out. They're appointed to figure this out. The bill says, you guys go figure this out. So we want to nudge them, urge them, cajole them to figure it out.
Where do we find their schedule? Where do we, where's
The commission?
Yeah.
They have their own website. If you go to the state's website and you go to the legislature's website, there's a little section that talks about statutory and standing committees
Okay.
and study commissions.
Yep.
And you go to that, and then if you just type in school funding, this one will come up.
I believe it's every Monday.
Mostly it's been every Monday.
No. David Ryan is.
Mostly Mondays at 10 o'clock. The next 2 weeks will be Mondays, but they're not going to be meeting in the Legislative Office Building. They're going to be meeting at 100 North Main Street in Concord for some reason. I don't fully understand. They say it's going to be a bigger room, but it is Monday at 10 o'clock, and you can go on their website to find out more.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.